When I'm using my milling machine, there's a handful of tools that I use all of the time. At the moment, they're kept in different drawers. If not, they've been left out on the side, just getting in the way. In this video, I'll make a really cool small cabinet to house them in, which will improve my workflow and just make things more enjoyable. You may remember my repurposed bandsaw cupboard from a while ago. I still love it, and to keep the similar theme, I'll repurpose this old machine pulley guard. Here's the tools I plan to keep in there, some on shelves, some will just hang on hooks. I'll mount it here, which will be at arm's reach. Anyway, let's get into it. The case itself will need a few modifications. It'll need a back panel and a bottom piece here, but before I do any of that, I'm going to make tool holders for all the tools that will live inside the door. They'll be made from aluminium scraps that were given to me by a local CNC workshop. To keep the hammer from sliding off the holder, I'll mill a couple of recesses in it that the hammer will locate into. It's always fun to make things, but I really do enjoy repurposing older items and making them into something completely different. You can really end up with something quite unique that you wouldn't have ever thought of making. I'll hang it a bit higher, but you get the idea. Next, I need some hooks for the other tools to hang on. I said hooks, but they'll be more like pegs, which I'll make from this brass rod from K&S Metals. I should just use a hacksaw to cut the rod, but I had 200 similar lengths to cut a couple of years ago, so I made this jig for my fly press, and as it only takes a minute to install, I thought I'd give it a run out. Off camera, I made a second one. I could attach it with screws from the outside, but I want a cleaner look, so I'll weld support something like this to the inside. I just added 3 plans for my box making jig, which I use later in the video, and I always forget to let you know about my free plans, so here you go. If you head over to my website, I'll put a link in the description and check out to see if you can find anything interesting. I was going to leave them with just the one spot weld, but I've decided to add a couple of tacks on the top of each bracket. I've ground down the welds a little, and I'm also removing a small section on the underneath of the holder to allow for them. There's quite a bit of working out as I go on this project, which is always a fun way to work. They're looking good, and here they are with the tools in place. I'm going to get or even make a 40mm wrench to replace the adjustable one. It's far too big. I'll take them off and start working on the cabinet itself, and I'll round over the edges of the tool holders later on. I'll grind off this bolt and I'll also give the whole thing a good cleaner. Next I'll weld on the bottom piece and the back panel. I'll use the MIG welder and make a series of spot welds so it doesn't get too hot and burn through. I also added an extra weld to the hinges as they're going to be carrying a fair bit of weight. The welding came out pretty good, I'm happy with that, and it's a lot more solid now. I have still got to put shelves across the back panel to store more tools, but before I do that I'm going to work on some really cool knobs. That's if they work, and they'll keep the door closed. The knurling didn't work as it should. It's a coarse knurl and it added an extra knurl in between. Anyway, I reckon that I was making the knobs far too big, so I'm turning it down and I'll have another go. This time I plunged the knurling wheel in hard at the start, then I only ran across it once and it worked. It doesn't look perfect, but with a quick sand it looks much better. Before I part off the first knob, I'll turn a subtle taper across the top of it. Now for the interesting bit, I've set up my rotary table to make a slot on the underneath. It's difficult to show, but I've nudged the table over 0.5 mm to make a slight recess on the way back. This will help to keep the door in the closed position. Here's the recess that I mentioned. Next I'll turn a couple of posts for the knobs to locate onto. I'll weld those onto the cabinet from the back. The nuts need to be shallow as they need to fit between the cabinet and the door. I'm not sure how well you can see this, but I put this one back on the rotary table. I moved it around 10 degrees and opened up this area here. I'll do this one next and then I'll file the edges as well to make it work a bit smoother. That works well. Next I'll make a shelf to keep an oil can on. I've made boxes like this so many times now in my videos, and as I mentioned earlier, I've just added the free plans for the jig on my website if you're interested. I need to modify it to make some clearance for the door to close. It was looking good, but there's a problem. I tried to modify it, which did work, but it took me a couple of attempts and then it started to look a bit average. So I zipped it off and I made a new one. I did a neater job of it this time with only one join either side. I welded it back on off camera and I also welded on the nuts that hold the knobs. That's much better, so I'll move on. I'll try and dress up the outside before I paint it as it looks a bit plain. I'll weld on a couple of strips just to add some kind of depth to it. One thing I didn't mention is the oil can I showed is far too big to fit in the cabinet, so I've ordered a new one which will be much smaller. This method worked, but it did kink slightly where the holes were as they are weak points. I would have been happier to have a nice continuous curve, but I should be able to sort it out. Hammering the high points down helped a bit, but a 40 grit disc on an orbital smoothed it out nicely. Next I'll add a logo to the front using a method I've shown before, and this is reverse by the way. The logo will be raised like the lettering I added to my drill press stand. The first thing I need to do is make a mould, and as the logo is square, I'll make a square frame to use as a guide for a router. I'm using a plastic chopping board for the mould and a router bit in the rotary tool. It's quite a deep mould and there's no draft angle, so I'm not certain this will work, but we'll find out. For the saw teeth section, I'll mark those out and then I'll cut them freehand. I finished off the corners with a chisel and cleaned everything up with a bit of scraping. The bottom's a bit rough, but that will be easy to sand out in the finished cast logo. That was the easy bit. Now I need to actually make the cast, which I'm definitely not confident about with the cabinet being round. I was worried that it may split, but heating it and tightening the vise slowly worked well. I thought it may spring right back, but it held its curve. For the cast, I'm trying out this quick setting JB weld, which I haven't used before. I like that it will set fast, but it does make things a bit tricky and I need to work quickly. When I've done this before, I've had time to work cleanly and scrape off the excess, but I got in a mess here. Anyway, I just got on with it and hoped for the best. I left it for an hour or so while I had lunch and I wasn't feeling very confident. And it was just about perfect. I really was surprised and I was expecting to scrape it off and have another go. I should be able to flatten it back out if I need to use it again on another project. Anyway, now I can put some paint on. That didn't come out too bad for an old beat up thing, so now I can sand the tool holders and fit them. The last thing to do is fit all these pieces into the cabinet, and to do that I'll make some shelves from this piece of angle. I could put the angle this way around, but I think I'll flip it over and use it the opposite way. I want the items to have their own spot and be able to locate onto the shelf. I'll use this piece of flat bar and then cut recesses into it. I drilled the holes off camera, which will get used to fix it to the shelf, but for now I'll use them to attach it to this plywood while I mill it out. I also added a few more screws to the waste pieces. I'm transferring the hole positions, which I then drilled off camera before tapping them. And this is the first time that I've used my tiny tap wrench since I made it, and it's awesome. I made the next one, which I won't show too much of as it wasn't that interesting other than freehanding a hexagon. I quickly made holders for my calipers and a rule. I just need to file a groove that will keep the calipers secure. I could have done this differently. The top section isn't needed at all, and if that wasn't there, I could have just milled the groove. But I like it as it is, so that's why I did it this way. I made a small peg for the rule off camera, which is drilled and tapped from the back to fix it with a screw. This is where it'll go. There's a stud behind here, so it'll get a good fixing. And this side, I'll use a scrap of plywood as a packer and screw through that and into the tin cladding. They all now have a place to live, and the small oil can arrived in the post. There's a problem though, these two wrenches are hitting the opposite shelf. I really thought that I had enough room, but I miscalculated and it shuts fine if I take them out. For a quick fix, I'll replace the other pegs with longer ones and double up the wrenches. In fact, 9 times out of 10, I use each pair of wrenches together, so it actually works out. I may find something smaller to hang on the other pegs, and I also drilled a hole in the other wrench which helps it to hang better. Anyway, I think it's pretty cool, and I still have a space above the oil can for something else. Let me know what you think of it and whether you thought it was a worthwhile project. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.